There's a moment in this transition that almost everyone I work with quietly dreads. It isn't the positioning work, it isn't the pricing, it's the sales conversation. The meeting where a relationship that's been pleasant and exploratory suddenly has to become specific, commercial, where at some point you actually have to ask for the work. And here's what I've noticed over hundreds of these conversations. For most senior executives, the hard part isn't the conversation itself. It's what they think the conversation requires them to become. Because somewhere along your journey, you have decided that you're not a salesperson. Now let me try and talk you out of that. Because the belief is costing you more than you realize. And it rests on a genuine misunderstanding of what selling for an advisor actually is. The belief runs roughly like this. Selling is a distinct skill possessed by a certain kind of person, and you are not that kind of person. There were people in your corporate world who were in sales, and you were not one of them. You operated, you delivered the things that they sold, you ran the things. So somewhere you arrive at independence carrying that identity. I'm not a salesperson. And you treat the part of the work that depends on selling as something to be outsourced, deferred, or simply endured until it's over. I want to suggest that that is a real misunderstanding, not of your character, but of what the task actually is. Think about what you've done in corporate thousands of times, inside internal meetings, inside a boardroom, and with teams that are struggling. You ask the question that exposes the real problem underneath the one everyone's discussing. You challenge the assumptions the team has stopped examining. You name what you see and you propose what might be done about it. That, and exactly that, is the entire substance of an advisory sales conversation. Now, the only difference is timing. In a mandate, you do it under contract. In a sales conversation, you have to do it before the contract exists. So, selling for an advisor is simply advising earlier and before you're being paid for it. That's my point. Once you see that, the identity problem dissolves, at least partly. You're not learning a new skill here. You already have the skill. You've spent 30 years building it. You were just calling it something else. Now, the second mistake follows directly from that first one. Because if you believe you're bad at selling, you tend to treat the sales conversation as an audition. And without quite realizing it, you model it on the most recent high-stakes conversation in your experience, which was a job interview. Now, think about the posture of someone being interviewed. You present your qualifications, you nicely answer the questions you're asked, you wait politely to be chosen, and you hope and pray. Now, that posture is absolutely fatal in an advisory sale, obviously. And not because of confidence, because of what the buyer is actually evaluating. As I've said before on this channel, a prospective client rarely asks how senior you were. They ask what will change in their business if they bring you in. They're not assessing your credentials. They're not interested, really. They're assessing your judgment. And judgment can't be demonstrated from a subordinate interview kind of posture. It can only be demonstrated by the thing itself, by showing your judgment. Let me show you what I mean. Same person, same meeting with the client, two ways to run it. Version number one, the executive does what feels safe. They talk about their background, 25 years, the companies, the scope of what they ran. They answer the client questions carefully. They wait for a signal that, we've done enough here. And the client says, look, this is really helpful. Let us think about it. And that's usually the last thing you'll hear from them. Version number two, the same executive arrives having actually thought about the client's situation in detail. Early on, they ask a question that goes one level deeper than the obvious. That nobody inside the business has been willing to ask. So the client pauses. They go like, ooh. And then the advisor offers a genuine, valuable observation. Not the whole answer, just enough so that the client feels directly what it's like to think alongside you. So the first conversation makes you a candidate, the second makes you a peer. And peers don't get chosen from a field of 3 or 4 different people. They get engaged because no one else is having that conversation with the client. Now, There's a related version of this I've seen as well, and it's worth the detour. The assumption that the client would really rather hire a firm, that you're the smaller, riskier option, and that somewhere in the conversation you're almost having to apologize for that. Look, sometimes a firm is genuinely the right choice, but the advisor who carries that assumption into the room kind of addresses the point before the buyer has even raised it. And you end up arguing quietly against your own engagement. Now, a firm's advantage is scale, and it's the cover your ass factor, really. And if this is what your prospective client needs, well, you'll never get the job anyway. Your advantage is judgment and direct access to you, to the senior. It's the fact that there's no layer between the client and you, the person actually doing the work. If you don't believe that's worth more in this situation for your prospect, then that's not a sales problem. That's a positioning problem, and it belongs back into the positioning video. Here's where the reframe becomes genuinely practical. If the sales conversation is just advising done early, then the conversation itself is a sample of your work. It's your first deliverable, offered before the engagement begins. This is why the strongest advisors I know don't pitch. They diagnose. They show up having thought about the situation, they ask the question beneath the question, and they give one real observation away. And the client leaves with something they didn't walk in with. Notice what that does. Having experienced your value once at no cost, your prospective client is suddenly far better able to imagine what it would be like to work with you. Now, you haven't described your value, you've demonstrated it. Those are completely different things. If you want something concrete to take from this, before your next prospect conversation, do the homework. And this is where a conversation with your favorite LLM can be priceless. Walk in prepared in so much detail that you're able to ask one question nobody inside the business has ever asked. Lead with an observation, not a list of credentials. Give one genuine piece of thinking away. That's not a sales technique. It's just advising, which is the thing you already know how to do. Now, let's be clear though. At some point, the conversation has to move from interesting to relevant to a concrete proposal. Someone has to say the next sentence, and it's usually you. But here's what changes when you've done the rest of it properly. You're no longer asking from an empty hand. The discomfort of selling, at its root, I think, is the fear of asking for something and being refused. If the conversation has already delivered something real, you're not asking for a favor here. You're proposing to continue the work that has visibly already begun. Here's what I think is going on. Here's what I suggest we do about it. Here is how I work with you, Mr. Prospect. That isn't a pitch, but the natural next sentence in a conversation that's already underway, so you can relax. Look, the employee waits to be selected, the owner decides the conversation is worth having, has it well, and proposes kind of the next steps. That's the whole shift. But it's the same shift that this entire channel is about, from operating inside someone else's structure to owning your own business in consulting. The sales conversation sits right between pipeline and pricing. It's what turns the conversations your pipeline generates into the engagement your pricing depends on. It's all parts of the same flywheel. It's a 5-part engine at the heart of what I call the second curve architecture. The complete framework is in the anchor video on this channel. Link is in the description, and I'll see you in the next one.